All right, let's dive right into this. Welcome to our explainer, where today we're going to explore how early sociologists tried to literally decode the hidden wiring of human behavior. Have you ever looked at a really bizarre cultural custom, or honestly even just an everyday social routine, and thought to yourself, why on earth do we actually do that? Well, early 20th century thinkers firmly believed they had the ultimate answer to that question. And that idea, it sparked a massive, field-defining movement in the social sciences that we now call functionalism.
To really wrap our heads around this, I want you to imagine something for a second. What if society isn't just this random chaotic collection of people, but is actually one giant living, breathing organism? Imagine every single social institution out there. We're talking the family, the legal system, religion, even the unwritten rules of making a joke. Imagine them as vital organs, much like a heart or lungs in a human body. In this specific view, every single custom exists for a reason. It performs a completely necessary function to maintain the health, the stability, and ultimately the survival of the entire social body. That right there is the absolute core metaphor of functionalism.
And this guy perfectly illustrates exactly where that idea began. Meet Émile Durkheim, the French founding father of sociology. Now, Durkheim looked out at the apparent chaos of human existence, but he firmly believed that, underneath it all, social life is incredibly orderly and totally susceptible to rigorous scientific analysis. He believed that societies are bound together by what he called organic solidarity, which is basically this massive, complex web of interdependence. It was Durkheim's vision that literally inspired an entire generation of anthropologists and sociologists to try and transform the study of society into a real, hard science.
Section 1. Structure versus individual needs. So that brings us to the early 20th century, where this absolutely fascinating rivalry started to emerge. We had two pioneering anthropologists who completely threw out the old playbook of speculative history. Instead, they wanted to figure out exactly how this social organism functioned in the present day. But, they went about it in two drastically different ways. On one side, we've got A.R. Radcliffe Brown, an English anthropologist championing what's known as structural functionalism. Radcliffe Brown was all about the macro level. He argued that the function of any custom has to be assessed by how it maintains the whole social structure, not by how it benefits the individual person. To him, the society was the primary reality. But then, on the flip side, we had Bronislaw Malinowski and his biocultural functionalism. Now, Malinowski looked at things on a micro level. He believed that cultural traditions only ever develop as a direct response to specific human needs, whether those are biological, psychological, or social. For Malinowski, culture was essentially a practical, everyday toolkit for individual survival.
Well, everything completely changed for the field in 1922. Scholars often refer to this as the annus mirabilis, literally the miraculous year of functionalism. In that single, pivotal year, both of these men published absolute landmark works. Radcliffe Brown dropped the Andaman Islanders, which heavily emphasized social solidarity and the function of rituals. Meanwhile, Malinowski published Argonauts of the Western Pacific. Malinowski had actually lived among the Trobriand Islanders, learned their native language, and basically established the gold standard for immersive participant observation. Suddenly, almost overnight, the field had moved entirely away from just sitting in armchairs and guessing about history.
Section 2. The science of joking. Okay, to see functionalism in action, let's look at how seemingly bizarre or even downright uncomfortable tribal customs actually serve a brilliant structural purpose. Radcliffe Brown became totally fascinated by what he called social disjunction and social conjunction. Think about what happens when two people get married, right? The husband, for example, is instantly brought into a special relationship with his new wife's family, but deep down he is fundamentally an outsider to them. This creates a really dangerous social disjunction, basically a divergence of interests, and a very real possibility for hostility. Yet, because of the marriage, they have to interact. That requires social conjunction, or basically the avoidance of strife. So society somehow has to invent a way to balance these two totally opposing forces. So the absolutely crucial point here is how different societies solve this structural problem. Radcliffe Brown mapped out two main strategies. The first one is extreme respect. Basically, to prevent conflict, some societies enforce super strict avoidance, like for example, a son-in-law completely avoiding any direct contact with his mother-in-law whatsoever. The second strategy, though, is the exact opposite. It's the joking relationship. This is a custom of permitted or even culturally required disrespect between peers of the same generation. Think cross-cousins, like the children of a brother and a sister, or brothers-in-law. They're expected to playfully tease and roast each other to constantly relieve social tension without ever causing actual offense. I honestly love this anecdote so much. Radcliffe Brown once asked an Australian native why he had to completely, utterly avoid his mother-in-law. The man didn't say it was because they hated each other, not at all. Instead, he replied, "Because she is my best friend in the world, she has given me my wife." It so perfectly proves Radcliffe Brown's whole point. This extreme avoidance isn't about hostility at all. It's actually a profound, highly structured mode of friendship and respect that is completely designed to protect the peace.
And let's look at how this plays out in the joking relationship. Take the Ojibwa Indians of North America. Between certain relatives, like cross cousins, they are culturally required to make incredibly vulgar allegations and jokes at each other. Now, by their standards, and definitely by ours, it sounds highly offensive. But because they are kind relations, no one is actually allowed to take offense. In fact, an Ojibwa who refuses to participate in all this vulgar joking is considered boorish, simply because they aren't playing the expected social game. It's basically a socially structured pressure valve designed to let off societal tension.
Section 3. Playing the sick role. Now let's pivot away from tribal islands and ancient customs and bring this right into the modern living room. We're going to apply this functionalist lens to something every single one of us has experienced: calling in sick to work. I really want you to think about your last sick day. How did you act? Did you stay in bed all day? Did you just marathon TV shows? Did you feel kind of guilty if you were seen out having fun? Sociologist Talcott Parsons actually argued that being sick isn't just a biological condition, it is a highly regulated social role. Because a sick person literally cannot fulfill their normal daily duties, they are deviating from the societal norm. If everyone just decided to be sick whenever they wanted, the whole machinery of society would completely grind to a halt.
So, to prevent this total societal breakdown, Parsons theorized this mechanism called the sick role. Basically, society grants the sick person temporary rights. You know, you're officially exempt from your daily duties like going to work, and you aren't personally blamed for catching a bug. But here's the catch. These rights are completely conditional. They come with really strict obligations. You absolutely must view being sick as an undesirable state, you must actively try to get well, and you must seek technically competent help. Parsons argued that this structure exists for a reason, to prevent individuals from enjoying the secondary perks of illness and forming some sort of dysfunctional subculture of the sick. And so, who exactly enforces all these rules? Well, the doctor. Parsons viewed the doctor as society's ultimate gatekeeper to the sick role. Drawing heavily on the work of Max Weber, Parsons noted that doctors use rational and legal authority to certify who is genuinely ill and who isn't. And, pulling from Sigmund Freud, Parsons actually likened the ideal doctor-patient relationship to a parent and a child. The doctor is emotionally detached and holds all this paternalistic power, while the patient is fully expected to be passive, trusting, and, well, literally patient. It's a very structured, incredibly functional view of modern medicine.
Section 4. When harmony fails.
Now, as we move into the 1960s and 70s, the world was going through massive, unprecedented social upheaval. We're talking civil rights struggles, anti-war movements, rapidly changing gender norms. Sociologists started to look around and realize that society is rarely as perfectly harmonious or naturally functional as folks like Radcliffe Brown or Talcott Parsons had suggested. The whole functionalist model was really starting to crack. Because of this, we start to see a stark contrast emerge in sociological thought. See, functionalism is built entirely on a consensus view, this basic assumption that equilibrium is the natural state of things and that all institutions naturally work together for shared goals. But thinkers like Ralph Dahrendorf and various Marxist scholars came along and introduced the conflict view. They observed that conflict, coercion, and inequality aren't just temporary glitches or dysfunctions. They are actually the primary engines driving social change. When you look at historical events like the civil rights movement, it wasn't society just happily returning to an old balance. It was a fundamental, necessary transformation driven by deep-seated social tensions. This conflict perspective also took a hard look at Parsons' incredibly tidy view of medicine. Marxist critic Ivan Illich introduced this really interesting concept called iatrogesis, which literally translates to doctor-induced illness. Illich argued that the medical system doesn't just heal people, it can actually cause serious harm. He broke this down into 3 types. There's clinical iatrogenesis, where the actual treatments or the hospitals themselves make you sicker. Then there's social iatrogenesis, where totally normal life events like grief, pregnancy, or aging become hyper-medicalized just for profit. And finally, cultural iatrogenesis, where we as a society slowly lose our traditional innate ability to cope with pain and stress without immediately needing a doctor's intervention. And the critiques definitely didn't stop there. Feminist sociologist Ann Oakley pointed out a massive blind spot in Parsons' sick role. She argued that women are rarely afforded the actual right to just drop their household or childcare duties the minute they get sick. The rules simply aren't applied equally across genders. Meanwhile, interpretivists Early and Goffman looked at hospitals directly through the lens of the actual patient experience. Instead of this purely benevolent healing environment that Parsons described, Goffman described something he called a mortification of self. He observed how total institutions, like hospitals, systematically strip away a patient's personal identity, taking their normal clothes, replacing them with identical gowns, and subjecting them to incredibly rigid, dehumanizing control.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. The functionalist era absolutely gave us incredible, groundbreaking tools to see exactly how customs, rituals, and institutions interlock to maintain societal stability. But as we've just seen, that same focus on stability can sometimes completely mask the inequality, the coercion, and the actual, messy, lived reality of individuals. So, I leave you with this to ponder. Does focusing purely on societal stability cause us to ignore the real needs of individuals? Or, as we move forward in trying to understand each other, do we actually need to embrace both the harmonious structures and the messy conflicts to truly understand the complex machinery of human behavior? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me.